This is the Audience Connection podcast presented by Casual, the video partner for global brands. 9 offices, 4 continents, creating impactful stories on a global scale with a local touch. I'm your host, Lydia Chan. Today, I'm joined by Eternal Polk, a seasoned film director and storyteller whose work spans branded content, music videos, commercials, and award-winning documentaries. Eternal has a finger on the pulse when it comes to what makes stories resonate, and his philosophy towards audience connection blends curiosity, culture, and lived experience. We had a thoughtful and energizing conversation about how brand storytelling has shifted from selling products to selling emotion, why some campaigns fall flat, and what it really takes to connect with audiences in a lasting way. Eternal cautions marketers on, not just looking at the data, but sometimes it's about instincts. But to have good instincts, you have to invest the time, be a part of the culture you're speaking to, and to listen closely to what moves people. Eternal also puts emphasis on staying endlessly curious. All right, let's dive right into it. Eternal, welcome to the show. I'm really looking forward to digging into your expertise as a film director, and also your philosophies around audience engagement. But first, let's start with a brief intro about Eternal. Who are you, and what are you all about?
We'll see if by the end of this you'll still extol the virtues of my expertise. Um, but I, would like to say I'm a father first. That's my favorite occupation, and a thinker, a creator, an idea generator who somehow became a filmmaker many years ago and was either silly or stubborn enough to still be a filmmaker. So, um, a little bit about me, originally from Indianapolis, Indiana, moved to New York City to go to NYU and put myself through film school during the glory days of film and Steenbecks, and went from there to NFL Films and did some really good work there, and actually really learned a lot about storytelling there. And then meandered around in this world of freelance, working on music videos and commercials, and then finally did branded content stuff, and then a feature documentary a couple of years ago, Gaining Ground: The Fight for Black Land, which is my first feature length documentary film. And so here we are. And that's a very truncated version. The journey and all of the travails of the journey are way more interesting than that. But for brevity's sake, that is it.
Let's talk about audience engagement, and you worked in such diverse places, right? From the NFL, branded content, advertising, music videos, branded documentary, doing your own projects. Um, how do you feel from an audience engagement standpoint, how it's shifted from, say, brands selling a product to selling emotions, right? And how or why brands that don't adapt to that will start losing its resonance within the industries that they operate?
Well, it was clearly a dividing line, and it came, interestingly enough, when I stopped working at NFL Films, and I really was wanted to do commercials, but I also wanted to do feature films, and then the BMW series came out, and then it's like the golden light just kind of shone all over all of us. It was this sort of nexus of a feature film, but it's actually selling a product, but it's not selling the product; it's selling the experience of the product. And if you can get this product, and you can be Clive Owen into, uh, doing all this amazing stuff. And I was like, oh wow, this is different. But I can tell you, it was I want to say it was a Korean commercial that really, really kind of knocked me over, because that was sort of blatant, like product placement, ish, because music videos have been doing that already. A lot of hip hop music videos have been using either cars or liquor brands or things like that to kind of get money for the music video. And so you kind of saw that, and so it was okay. But this commercial was about a man just going along the streets doing good. It was very emotionally resonant, and it looked like a short film. And at the end of it, it said insurance, and I was like, "Oh my God, they got me!" Because I bought into this whole idea, the story that was being told, this person being helpful, that resonated with my spirit, being helpful, being of service. And then at the end, they just put the little tag on about the commercial. And I said, I mean, about the insurance. And I said, that's brilliant. Because if I am just thinking that I want life insurance, I'm going to remember that commercial because it touched me in an emotional space. And that's when I started saying, "Oh wow, this is the shift in advertising. It's not selling the virtues of the product and how much you'll save and how efficient it is." And it was literally, I'm going to create an experience in front of you and tell a story. And if it resonates with you, maybe you want to buy our product.
Yeah.
It worked for me because I realized that I didn't want to be sold anything anymore. I was tired of like just bombarding me with like, you're better than this, or, you're 30% more than this. And so I said, I don't want to be sold anything. And I know the people around me are tired of being pitched to all the time. And so it was very clear that those sort of things would start to emerge. And then more and more it did. And then we started getting into around that time the started emergence of like immersive and experiential things, which are again a story that you're in resonating with you, and then you're like, oh, this brand is doing this cool sort of experience. What I want to be a part of it.
Yeah.
So you
Yeah.
went from the separation between the consumer and the brand started to decrease to the point where the consumer started to be a part of the brand because it was either their virtues or their morals or their social conversations, all of these entry points where you could be a part of the brand.
Yeah. How do brands kind of find those emotions, right? Or separate the r- reasons to believe of a product or a service and find the deeper emotions to storytell off of, right? Because I definitely have recently seen a lot of commercials where it's a nicely produced commercial. It's obviously doing something. All of a sudden you're like, oh, it's a cleaning product, and you're like, what?
You know, as with anything, it can be overdone.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes, it's sometimes it's hilarious, especially when like you see a pharmaceutical commercial and
You have to be outdoor doing some activity. You're biting a burger.
it's it's clearly the best part of your life, except for all the side effects that you get with taking this. And it's almost the formula. And I think that's where you start to lose that ability. Um, when it becomes formulaic,
Hmm.
then it becomes stale, and you're just kind of being lazy, and you're not trying to really touch the the audience because you're trying to get through it and get it done. But I think the kind of the those entry points are really just one, being in tune with the people that work for you
Mm.
and allowing different voices to present, emerge, be heard. There's a real there's a real interesting story with the Jennifer Hudson show, and with her with that the walk of where everyone kind of sings when the guests come,
I love
And
that.
right, and you love it, and it basically is the stamp of that show, and that was from a junior person in the room. It wasn't someone who was like top level coming up with that idea. It was someone who was young, who had an idea, and who actually was empowered to speak and say, "Hey, I got an idea. Why don't we do this?" And
Yeah.
it totally is this thing that everyone looks forward to from that show, and became viral. It's identifiable with that show now. You couldn't imagine that show without it. So, and this is kind of the shift in business that people work for places that they respect or try to, that align with their values, that are doing good in the world in some way, shape, form, or fashion.
Hmm.
Um, and I think if brands remember that they're in a unique position in that whatever they do, it's a platform, and that what they do can literally change the world. Decisions they make, and I'm not talking about just like an ad or a spot, where they put their attention, where they put their money, what they stand for or what they don't stand for, can change the world, can change perception, can change lives. And if you realize the I guess the power in that, you start to look at how can we, what can we do, and how can we be most effective? Because brands and commercials convince you to do things in 15 to 30 seconds,
Yep.
sometimes 6 seconds. That is an amazing skill. And if you and if you can do that in 6 to 15 to 30 seconds, what can you do when you're like really like looking at the people and saying, how can we really change or move the needle in some significant way other than just selling? Um, we're going to buy stuff because we need stuff. The question is, how do you differentiate between the things you buy? And are you loyal to the things you buy? Do you care about the place that's making it?
Yeah, it's like kind of how you build brand loyalty and
Mm-hmm.
trust, right? That's like things, you know, kind of sort of human things that are beyond, again, being sold to with a 15 to 60, 30-second commercial. Um, and I also like what you said about, ideas come from everywhere, right? And I think that has been more widely accepted, right, nowadays. But there still needs to be more of that empowerment, as you said, to sort of bring different voices to the room on any given project, so that again you're just getting different perspectives. And I I want to touch on you mentioned you're literally changing minds, or making someone make a decision in 30 seconds, right? Or even say longer form to go into a deeper story. How how do you do that, right? Because when we talked earlier, you mentioned kind of keeping an ear on the streets, or being very observant of trends, and being maybe like just really in the conversation as a brand versus, observing from afar. Can you talk a little bit about that?
It's always good to have like a 30,000 foot view of things sometimes, where you can see the lay of the land and all of that. But I think where brands kind of lose touch is they get into an ivory tower of thinking and acting. So it's sort of like you're looking down and you see movement, but you don't know who's moving, who's causing the movement, why are people moving, and that's where that sort of distance creates confusion for them. And and by the time it gets to where you're at, it's something different. It's already been done or overdone. And so you do kind of have to stay engaged. I often wondered when when I would get an RFP or some call to come up with an idea, I, and then the brand would like want it on TikTok or Instagram or Facebook. I said, do these people even use the platform like that? to know like what's actually happening, to know what's going on. I was working on a project last summer, and we were, it was political in nature, and we were talking about different subject matter. And it was when Kamala had given the Black Mama stare, and culturally, I knew what that meant, but I also knew what it meant to Black folks. I also knew what it meant in context of the questioning of Kamala's um, blackness. These are things that sometimes you're just aware of because you're connected to the culture. But also, I was on Instagram, I was on Twitter, and I followed all the little rabbit holes of everyone talking about it, and I knew it was going to be something that came up. And when we were talking, I just kept insisting we need to talk about it. We need to talk about it. And then maybe like a week or two later, it kind of blew up and everybody was talking about that particular thing. So you do have to kind of still engage and do the things that you did when you were coming up, when you were, I know when you get older, you don't want to be at the club, but sometimes you have to go out. You just do a drive by the club and then see what they're playing inside. And then you kind of are clear. But also, I pay attention to my kids. I have younger kids. My youngest is 12, and I literally just look to see what she's doing. What has her attention? I'm like, do that because all of her friends are doing that, and so it's not really complicated. It's just kind of looking and then not getting stuck in your routine of how you do things. And I always say this: I know people like numbers, and I know people like the metrics. I know they love them because they're trying to mitigate risk. But all of the great things that are done, we're like, hey, we're going to take a risk at some point, and they just do stuff. And you got to kind of consider that, but also consider like what could it possibly be if you just go outside that little box a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. No, I think, data alone is not enough, right? And data is that 10,000 feet, right? You're kind of observing from afar. You're looking at the metrics, but you're not really. It's the critical thinking part, right? Around the metrics. It's like, how do you understand this data, the nuances that went into it? And if you're not a part, again, of the conversation, then you're not going to tease out those things from the data, right? It's like kind of looking at the data without, that baseline knowledge, right? And really, I mean, I think real connection is a long-term commitment, right? Like you said, like, you kind of need to put in the effort, put in the work, be at the club in the corner doing the two-step or something, right? Like you like
Yeah, I'm definitely at the two-step age.
so yeah, I think that's really important when again you're trying to be relevant, and then how that informs your storytelling is going to be what sets you apart from others.
But you know what I think part of it is that I don't know, and I don't know if it's always been this way, but I just know that when I was growing up, there was always a a thing about knowing different things and exploring different things and being interested in different things. And maybe it was just me, but I do like to know about a little bit about everything. I approach the world with a very strong curiosity and like what's going on here. And even if I'm not a part of it, and I think as someone who is post 50, you would think that that's not my bag. But I could tell you more often than not that I have put younger people on to music or art or design. And I'm like, you don't know about this? This is your generation. And I think there's this sort of thing of people sticking in their boxes where they're really comfortable. And I like to kind of, if I'm not in another box, I'm definitely looking in and like, hey, what's going on in there? And
Yeah.
like, how is that moving and resonating? Because I'm really curious about people and what moves them. And I think it's a value add to what I do. when I'm coming up with all these different ideas in different platforms and different arenas and mediums.
Yeah. Um, I I think that's the key, right? Is for brands to also stay curious, is to stay curious about again what is happening in kind of the world of their audience, right? Or who they're trying to connect to.
But who is that? Do they have a chief curious officer at
Yeah.
the brand? But they probably should have someone that's like, look, your job is just to meander around and just find
I
out
like
what's
that. I
happening
like
in the
that. So
world.
what does that role look like, right? So chief curious officer.
Yeah, chief curiosity officer. I think we just started a new position, and I think I could take that up. And I just travel the world, and all I do is just absorb stuff. And I say, hey, look, this is happening in Morocco right now. So if you got something going on in the Middle East, then here's some information for you. But I do think you kind of have to have someone who is like that, who
Mm,
is like eager to go out and just kind of see what's happening, because I don't I don't want the relevance to be inauthentic and transactional.
yeah.
And I think if you know what people are actually going through and dealing with, you start to realize, oh, I can move this needle a little bit. I can still sell a product and still move a needle where I affect change because of the platform and the resources I have. That's where brands are sort of amazing. Is their resources in their platform, their network. They can
Yeah.
make things happen really quick.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And again, that allows them to create, like you said, meaningful content, right? You talked about many brands kind of operating in a bubble and being disconnected from reality and the Super Bowl ad problem. Can you expand a little bit on that? Like why major campaigns kind of maybe fall flat because they're it's like the same Z's, right? Of the people involved, of again, we're all looking at the same data set, etc. Like how do we break away from that again as creators, as filmmakers, and to really produce content that people actually want to watch?
What I did this morning, as I said, I did a search for the best commercials from the '90s. That's just like the top commercials from the '90s, and just to see like what was happening at the time, because I really am a big fan of commercials. And there was a time where the anticipation of a Super Bowl commercial was like, we're going to get the best of the best, and it's going to be over the top. It's going to be funny. It's going to be ridiculous. And then it comes now lately in the last, I want to say 5, 6, 7 years. Not much has really kind of stood out. It's definitely nothing iconic. It's definitely anything that anyone's still talking about. And I think part of the problem is really a lack of diversity in the people making the spots who are coming up with the creative. And I know when you spend $5 million on something, or 6 million, or 7 million, or however much they're spending, that you definitely want to make sure it hits. But I think that's where you kind of fail, because you start getting into doing what's already been done. Like, do I need to see another Budweiser commercial with the horses and like come on. But let's just say you take that same thing with the Clydesdales, and you actually have them in a story where they're helping people for real, not helping people get drinks, but actually helping people like farmers or people who are in these locales, and you're actually doing something for real. Wouldn't that be cool? That would
Yeah,
be
it's
like,
like
oh
how
wow,
does the brand impact the communities around them or
community.
just like the story of the product,
Right,
right? So how does that impact the um I don't know what goes into beer, but like wheat and and telling those stories
right.
within again these like 30-second commercials versus I don't know something that's yeah just that just doesn't hit.
Well, and that's the thing. And I think when you have different people from different backgrounds who have different points of views and have different entry points to this world, you start to get a little. I know that. DEI is the favorite buzzword, or anti-DEI is the favorite buzzword of the day. But honestly speaking, if I am, if you are looking at, say, a car, you're looking to purchase a car, how would you feel if you went to every brand and every car was the exact same car? You want diversity in your cars. It's like the things that are just basic, because then this brand, maybe they have different features. They have different things that are more attuned to what you want, what your style is, what you feel. So the idea that we want to get rid of diversity, or some people want to get rid of diversity, is just ridiculous, because it means less options, less choices, and less viewpoints of something that we desire, which is the best outcome. And so I think that's a big problem with it. And until they start opening that up to people who are diverse in thought, ideas, positions, backgrounds, it's going to keep being the same. And they're going to keep doing something that they think is cool. But if you don't have someone in that room that's just like, when's the last time you did that thing that you're trying to, put in this spot? You didn't know any of the people that do that. Do you know the culture? Do you know the nuances of that thing that would actually make that funny? Then you're going to keep getting that stuff. And so they just have to do better, I think, at opening up the doors for letting different people have an opportunity to do those things, and support them in doing it, because you don't have to fail if you haven't done a Super Bowl spot before. They have enough experts around to
That have
make
failed.
sure that have failed, but to make sure that you actually, create something cool. But you got to open it up, in my opinion.
Yeah, for sure. Um, well, Eternal, I mean, to kind of wrap things up, any sort of final maybe advice or thoughts for brands when they're looking to future proof their storytelling?
To future proof it, I think one of the things that we have to just kind of concede is that a lot of us are guessing, and some of us are making what we call educated guesses, because we've experienced enough, we've seen enough, we've gone through enough. And that's the sort of thing, that I think when we talk about this world, and I'm just going to speak from my perspective as an older person in this arena, that I love young voices and I love younger voices, because sometimes not knowing any better is great, because you haven't already edited yourself before you try. You're just like, oh, I'm gonna do this, and then you're like, wow, this worked out. But I also think there's something to be said for having gone through and seen a lot of things. And so you start to say, oh, this is the cycle or the trend. And if you're around long enough, you see, I know someone that's in the 70s that didn't want to let go of their bell bottoms, that was just waiting for the time when bell bottoms would come back in, because they will. And it's the
Came
same
back twice
thing,
now.
you know? So if you think about it, things are cyclical, people are cyclical, and history is important. And as I mentioned earlier, I went back and looked at, top commercials from back then. And it was funny because I remember laughing at those commercials. And I just said, okay, what did any of the brands do any kind of social, like, campaign? And sure enough, Pepsi and Coca-Cola did initiatives that were supposed to support the neighborhood and changes and things like that. So it's not new. Like, if people think that, George Floyd in a response to that from brands is new, no. Rodney King happened, and brands responded and organizations responded. Did all of them stick with their goals? No, because if they had, then you wouldn't think that George Floyd is new. So,
Mm,
I really think that the, you know, history and cycles, and just kind of going back and looking and see. what happened before and how we did things before and how we responded can help you avoid the pitfalls and the missteps from the past. And they say um, history is one of the best teachers, and one of the things that if you study it, hopefully you won't repeat it. And I think that's the way you kind of future proof things a little bit more. Is that kind of just look and see how people screwed up before and
Yeah.
say, don't do that. It's not rocket science in that
Yeah.
regard.
No, I mean I think that's a great place to end Eternal. I mean, it's really the balance of the old and the new, right? Like, young folks, they're still curious. Like you said, their minds aren't kind of too tainted in a way, right? And we got us old folks where it's like, oh, okay, like we see the patterns, we see the cycles, and we learn from that, right? So that bringing that together in conversation is the way to go. So,
Yeah.
Eternal, thank you so much for joining the
Thank you for
show.
having me.
I
This was
appreciate
fun.
you.
This was fun.
Thanks for tuning in to the Audience Connection podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to subscribe and leave us a review. If you'd like to connect with me about how I can help you tell better stories and connect better with your audiences, drop me a note, Lydia at casualfilms.com. We'll be back with more episodes soon. See you next time.